Hajek, and I'm the president and founder of Gentle Giants. So doing a presentation today on how to start a horse rescue. Now, I've been kind of playing with this presentation a little bit the last week because they've only given me an hour, and that doesn't give me a lot of time to cover much information. So what I've done is I've put all the really boring stuff in packets for you guys. So if you're seriously interested at the end of this presentation, which you probably won't be, this packet would actually cover, I've done one for Pennsylvania and one for Maryland, and it actually literally has a check-off of every single thing that you would need to do in order to form a nonprofit organization, and literally will even tell you what the fees are going to be to file, where you're going to mail it to, and I even went so far, because I'm a really, really nice person, I even included a blank, fill-in-the-blank articles of incorporation. Do not need to pay an attorney to do these kind of things. This is pretty common sense. It'll save you about $1,000. Fill that in and submit it. It also covers how to write your organization's bylaws. And if you're in Maryland, it also covers what you would need to do to become licensed to operate as a rescue. I did call the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and they were not aware if any of their counties required that a rescue be licensed and inspected. In Maryland, that is a state law. It may be in Pennsylvania. They couldn't really give me a clear answer on that one. So, first question, and I do have a lot of people who call me or email me or want to talk about starting an organization. And the first thing I normally ask everybody is always, are you nuts? You got to be a little bit nuts. Certainly, starting a nonprofit organization is going to take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it's going to get a lot harder before it gets a lot easier. So you're going to have to think about the sacrifices that you're going to need to invest in order to become successful. It's not going to happen overnight. So to give you a little bit of a bio about me, my education is as a paramedic and a firefighter. So you're probably sitting here and you're thinking, why in the world is a paramedic firefighter up here lecturing about starting a nonprofit organization? Well, I started Gentle Giants back in 2005 when I was working as a firefighter, and on my off time, I had a little hobby of trimming and shoeing horses. And I thought it would be a lot of fun if I could find a draft horse rescue that I could volunteer with, and I could trim and shoe the horses for them. It'd be mutually beneficial. That's where my interest was. I had a lot of free time, and I thought it would help them too. I was a little shocked when I went online and I found out that not only was there not a draft horse rescue in my state to volunteer with, there wasn't one on the East Coast, and there wasn't one in the whole entire country. So I decided, if not them, why not me? And that started this adventure. So when Gentle Giants was formed in 2005, my incorporation papers showed a vision of one day having, hold your horses, 5 horses. I wanted to have 5 rescue horses at any given time. So now we're quickly approaching, our 10-year anniversary is going to be in October, and we have a base herd of 70 horses. We can accommodate up to 85 horses in the event of an emergency. Humane rescue organizations rely on us up and down the East Coast. We've even worked on a national level with HSUS. The rescue now spans 135 acres, and it is in the incredibly fortunate situation that we actually own our own land. The rescue owns its own land. So the rescue is not held victim to a landlord who could raise our rent, cancel our lease, or tell us that we have 30 days to figure out what in the world we're going to do with 70 horses. So we're very, very fortunate in that respect. We now have a staff of 5 full-time people and 3 part-time that work with the rescue. I've spoken on CNN to argue the horse slaughter debate. I've addressed Capitol Hill 2 times, and I also teach classes for the Equine Welfare Alliance and the Homes for Horses Coalition. So how in the world did I get here? This is certainly not what I set out to do. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to teach this class is when I was starting, I met a lot of really great organizations that helped me on my way up. And they helped me not make the mistakes they had made, and so I want to pass that on and pay it forward so that I can help other smaller starting organizations not make mistakes along the way too. The other thing is I'm obviously very, very passionate about equine welfare, and we need good, strong horse rescues out there. There's a lot of horse rescues out there right now. There are not many that are very, very strong. And that's what we need to see, is an improvement in our equine welfare division. So, does anybody here currently work with an established rescue group? No? Anyone here, anyone here seriously thinking about starting a rescue? If you're thinking about it, I'll talk to you about it. No, I'm kidding. Maybe I won't. Anyway, all right. So the unfortunate part is first you have to stop and have a reality check. And you have to ask yourself the hard questions before you can ask yourself the easy questions. And the reality is that 50,000 nonprofits fold every single year. It's a hard, hard business. And you have to look at what it takes to make it. It's still a business. Most organizations don't survive their first 3 years. And this is one thing that a lot of people don't understand. When my husband and I formed Gentle Giants, it was funded almost completely and totally out of our pocket the first 3 years. We completely financed it. So when I get a lot of calls and emails and people say, hey, I really want to start a rescue, my first question to them is, can you afford to run this on your own without donation support for at least 2 to 3 years? And if the answer is no, then my hard advice has to be, this is probably not a step for you to take. Because the reality is, just because you put the name Rescue or Sanctuary on it, just because it says nonprofit, donations aren't necessarily going to pour in right away. It takes a good solid 3 years to develop a really, really reliable donor base. And I think a lot of organizations get into trouble because they don't understand that as their organization's growing, there's going to be lots of periods of feast and famine. You're going to have periods where something happened and tons of donations are going to pour in, but you have to understand that that's not necessarily going to remain that way. And I think a lot of organizations get into one of those feast periods and they'll acquire more horses, they'll grow, and then they can't sustain that growth over a long term. Additionally, if you want to apply for any grants from gifting foundations, they're going to require at least 3 years of your financial records to look at, and they're going to want to see a successful 3 years. They're not going to want to see a struggling 3 years. And unfortunately, the sad reality is you can do everything right, you can have the best idea, you can have the most passionate mission, you can have the most incredible cause, and it doesn't mean that your dreams and your goals are necessarily going to be met. That's just unfortunately the way the cookie crumbles. So, scare you? Because maybe it should be. So, on to the good stuff. Questions that are important to ask yourself. First question you need to ask yourself is there a need for the organization that you want to form? And I think all of us here as horse lovers can say, absolutely. There's an amazing amount of equine need right now for rescue and welfare. So, of course we know, yes, there's a need, and there's going to be a need for a very, very long time. But an important question would also be, are you going to be duplicating an effort? Right now we have an awful lot of organizations that are very, very small, poorly funded organizations that are barely getting by. If your idea was to open another very small organization that would also probably be poorly funded and would also probably barely get by, you might be duplicating an effort. And if you truly want to serve the cause of equine welfare, if you had an ability to take in 5 or 6 horses, maybe your cause would be better served by partnering with an already established group and serving as a foster home. Or if maybe you have a skill as a trainer, you could work with a like-minded group and take their most difficult horses and train those horses up for them so that they became more adoptable. And that might actually be a way to be a more effective rescuer than opening another rescue. So it's something that you really can consider. But the most important thing you have to ask yourself if you're thinking about starting a rescue is how are you going to stand out in this crowd? You know, and the unfortunate reality is we have a lot of organizations out there, but if you look at our organizations that are our largest organizations, are ones that have stayed around, and are ones that are very successful, you're going to notice something. They all do something very specific. When you think about horse rescue on a very broad scale, you're going to think Gentle Giants, you rescue draft horses. You're going to think Days End, they save horses from slaughter and neglect. You're going to think Front Range, they have wild mustangs. So each of these organizations is partially, I mean, we're all successful because we do our jobs very, very well, but we're also successful because we have one thing that we do, and we do it exceptionally well. I'm not saying that you can't fund an all-breed rescue that rescues from all types of situations and has no specific focus and not be successful. You certainly can, and if that's the route you go, I hope you are. I'm just saying you're going to have a harder time. So if you can pick something and focus on you're going to rescue one breed, or you're going to rescue from one type of situation, or you're going to, say for instance, Cowgirl Spirit is a group I really like out in California. It's a group of young ladies. They rescue all breeds, but they put an exceptional amount of training on their horses. And that's the one thing they do different that allows them to stand out above the crowd. So it is important when you come up with your plan of how are you going to survive amongst the roar of all these other organizations. So nonprofit organizations are still a business, and you have to think of it that way. And here's the issue. Most people who are incredibly passionate about horses, most people who are incredibly gifted with horses, and most people who want to work with horses kind of lack in these areas. I know when I started, I did too, but I have a couple things in my personality that really work for me. One, I am nosy as all get out. If I ever come to your house, no, I will look in your medicine cabinet. So that works to my benefit, because I'm going to look at the tax returns of every organization that I admire. And then I'm going to look at the tax returns of every organization I don't. And I'm going to learn what everyone is up to, and I'm going to see how they're doing it. So I'm a very curious person, and that's part of what's taught me a lot of these skills that I needed. Was I got out there, I saw the good, I saw the bad, and I learned it all. I learned from what I wanted to do, and I also learned what I did not want to do. So one of the first things you're going to have to decide is what's your service, and how are you going to offer it? So that would be, what would your rescue service be, and how is it going to be delivered? If you're going to rescue horses from auction, who's going to pick them out? Who's going to purchase them? Where are they going to go? How are you going to offer it? Who's going to be your adopters? How will you find them? How will they choose the horse? Are they going to come and try it out? Or is it just going to be like an online application? So you have to really think out every single step of how this organization is going to work and function from beginning to end. The next question would be, how will you brand that service? When we talk about branding, that's something that always gets people a little confused. Like, branding? What do you mean? Branding is really important, and it's a little bit different than marketing. Marketing is just going out and unearthing your donors, finding them, and activating them. That's kind of the easy part. Branding gets a little different. Branding goes past just having a logo and just having a name that people recognize. Of course, you have to have a logo and you have to have a name. It's how you're going to identify yourself. But branding goes one step further. What branding does is it allows people, when they see your name and they see your logo, you want them to experience certain emotions. The other thing that it does is it lets them know and have an understanding of who you are and why what you do is important. So it's very interesting to think that you're going to have to actually think of how are you going to package this brilliant, beautiful idea that you have. You're also going to need to develop a mission statement. And mission statements are pretty simple. They should be 1 to 3 sentences long, and it's a brief, broad explanation of what an organization does. Gentle Giants was facilitated to rescue draft and draft cross horses from slaughter, abuse, and neglect. One sentence, you know every single thing we do. And mission statements are important because really they should be visited anytime you're making a major decision. If you have a major decision on your plate, you need to read yourself your mission statement and ask, is what I'm deciding to do in the best interest of this organization? Does it further my mission? And that will really help keep you on track and keep you incredibly focused. Next thing to think about is you would need to select a board of directors. To start an organization, you need at least 3. You have to have a president, you have to have a treasurer, and you have to have a secretary. And a lot of people that want to start an organization don't necessarily understand the way that a board of directors functions. One thing that's a little bit different with a nonprofit organization than with a for-profit organization is that nobody owns it. I might be the president and the founder of Gentle Giants. This is my dream and it's my baby, but I do not own it. And I am acutely aware of the fact that I serve at the pleasure of my board of directors. If I begin to make choices that my board does not like, all they have to do is have a majority vote, and they can vote me out, and I am gone, and there's nothing I can do about it. And there's a humongous amount of risk in that. There really, really is. It's not uncommon to see organizations where you have someone that leads that organization for 5, 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years. And then if their focus and the board focus shifts, you might see that founder be booted out. Now my hope is that one day I won't be booted out, but that one day I can pass Gentle Giants on to somebody else who's going to be just as passionate as I am, and that I don't have to be doing this when I'm 75. But we'll see. The other thing to understand is how a board of directors functions. Obviously, your board's going to have a lot of power. So you need to make sure that one, these are people that you trust. Two, they're people that are very like-minded and have the same vision and the same mission that you do, and that there isn't a conflict of interest there. And three, you have to make sure there has to be balance here. They have to be people that you can work with very well, but ideally, you want to have people who have complementing abilities to your own. If everybody's too much alike, it's going to be hard to get the work done. For example, a lot of the people that I've chosen and invited to be on my board have excellent organizational skills because I completely lack them. So I want to find people that complement my weaknesses. So there's different ways that a board can function. When we look at a board of directors of a very large nonprofit organization, let's say a college or a hospital, your board's going to act in a completely governing way. You think of the organization as a ship. The founder, president, or director is going to be the captain of the ship. They're steering it. And the board's there to make sure that that ship's going where it needs to be going and that it's going to get there on time and it's doing the right thing. But they're actually not involved with the day-to-day planning. When you're talking about a very small organization, your board's going to function in a very different way. It's probably going to be administrative. You're not going to have office staff, so most likely your most involved people will be your board, and they're going to be functioning for you in that administrative way. And coming on 10 years, Gentle Giants is getting to a really interesting part now where we're moving from an administrative board over to a governing board. And it's a really interesting and different change. It can be kind of a challenge, but it's not uncommon that you'll see completely all one way, all administrative, completely all governance, and then sometimes you'll see organizations where it's split just a little bit. So along with that, you're going to have to find somebody who's going to want to do your paperwork, your bookkeeping, and your accounting. Because there's a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of bookkeeping, and there's a lot of accounting. Even if you're not going to go all the way to forming a 501c3, we'll talk about the differences about that in a couple minutes. You're also going to need to decide if you need to have any type of special licensure, and that might be statewide or it might be countywide. And like I explained before, in Maryland that's a big thing. In PA it might not be, but you should at least check, even check your local zoning, make sure that you can exist where you're planning on putting your organization. You're also going to want to look at determining what's going to be the structure of your organization. Are you going to function off of one farm, or are you going to have multiple foster homes? Let's say you're going to be an organization that has horses spread out all across your state or even all across the country. Let's say I get an email from a perfect adopter and you are my foster home. And I say, oh, what's your name? Nancy? Madison. And I say, oh, Madison, I got this great adopter and she's going to come out on Tuesday at 5 to look at that horse. I think this is a match. And you say, that's wonderful, I can't wait. The lady comes out and she tries the horse. The horse is really nice normally, but that day the horse bucks her off and it breaks her back. Who's liable? Am I liable or is she liable? Those are things you're going to have to work out in advance as you think about your business plan. Most small organizations aren't going to have the kind of insurance that would protect Madison, but she's going to be the person who's going to need it most. So those are some of the business ideas you're going to have to think all the way through as you think about your business plan. So the next thing you're going to have to think about is fundraising. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do all of this without any money, so you're going to have to come up with an idea of how are you going to fundraise for your money, and how much support are you going to need. Like I've already stated very clearly, if you're thinking of starting an organization, you're going to have some amount to self-fund, at least as a startup. So you're going to have to look at what else do you need additionally, and realistically, how are you going to raise that money? You should also look and consider what challenges do you have. Certain organizations are going to have different challenges. I know when Gentle Giants was starting, the big challenge that we had is that we're located 3 miles away from a very large, strong organization that's been in Maryland for 25 years. We're right next door to Days End. It was very difficult for us to fundraise in Maryland when we were small and starting out. Anywhere you went, oh, you work with horse rescue? Are you Days End? It was very, very difficult to get a foothold. So we said, that's okay. We recognize